All right, I've got to order USB to 12 volt. I probably need another one of these squid power splitters for my dew heater band.
Just get an ASIAIR. Why do you want to complicate things so much? Hey kid, just use me. I got all the ports and I'm so easy.
Oh, not me. I'm super flexible and I won't lock you down to my gear.
Hey, be nice.
Okay, Dr. Flexible, let's see you turn on a simple 12-volt socket.
Ouch. Okay, you've got a point. Enough. You both have your pros and your cons, but PC, you've got to admit that your inability to cheaply do things like power switching is kind of a huge hassle.
Now there's an inexpensive solution to this massive caveat of using a PC. The SVBONY SV241 Pro.
Whoa, that sounds like a really great option. So you're telling me that in this box that you just handed me, we can unpack a device that when combined with a mini PC will be a true ASI killer? Well, maybe. Let's see what we see. All right, this is one of the first equipment reviews that I'm going to be doing, and just so that everyone knows, I bought this box myself with my own money, and I had it shipped to not my own name, just to be sure that no one thought that it was me. I'm not big enough to really be on anyone's radar yet anyway, but just so you know, I bought this with my own money. If you appreciate this sort of content, make sure to like and subscribe. Liking videos, especially some of the earlier ones, and subscribing really helps small YouTube channels like myself grow. And let me know what you thought about this content. All right. This is the SV241 Pro from SVBONY. Now, I've purchased a lot of products from SVBONY in the past, and they're generally pretty good quality. The software support is a little bit less so, and if you have issues with drivers, then sometimes it's hard to get good answers. But if you don't have those issues, then everything's usually pretty great. Now, support can sometimes be lacking, and because the brand isn't as popular as ZWO, there's less people on the forums that know how to fix that one little thing you had, so sometimes you have to go it alone. Though, to be honest, this isn't all that different from other smaller brands in the space like your Toptex and whatnot. So why is the ASIAIR so widely used? One of the main points of the ASIAIR, which I left outside, is its ability to not just be a really good interface on the software side, but on the hardware side too. So it's one box that handles power, data, and I think on some modules it'll even do variable power output for things like dew heater strips. But for those of us that want to use cameras from other brands that aren't ZWO, you're out of luck. I have an ASIAIR and I do use it for travel, but I can only take this one specific camera with it, and the telescope has to have a ZWO focuser on it. And that can be kind of rough sometimes. So my main imaging rig and the rig that I use for experiments uses Windows PCs. And there are some great options for Windows PCs, from high-end bells and whistle options from that very excited gentleman over at Prima Lucia to options from Melee. I've personally settled on small PCs that have very little support because I'm a glutton for punishment. No, mostly because they're like $200 and it's hard to beat something with enough processing power for Nina and PhD2 while also having 16 gigs of RAM, including a 512 gig hard drive and a Windows license for $200-300. The prices change on those all the time, but it's not that hard to find something with an Intel N100 system, plenty of ports, that runs off a 12-volt socket like the rest of our equipment does. The main issue most of us Windows people have is the mess of cables, and how do you power so many DC devices from one power supply? Sure, you can use those squid splitters like I was showing earlier, but the quality can be sometimes suspect. Worst case, you might have one USB port for your main camera, one USB port for your guide camera, one USB port for your focus motor, one power port for your main camera, one power for your focus motor like the Celestron ones, and then power for your dew heater. That's a bunch of cables that have to be routed up to the moving part of your rig from a stationary part usually. So, there's even trade-offs there. You might have all of your cables neatly bundled But if one goes bad, or you want to change out a piece of equipment that's got a different cable, you end up having to cut zip ties and having to redo the whole bundle. Or if you like to live a little dangerously, you don't cable manage as tightly, and then you wake up one morning because some USB cable got snagged on your counterweight bar, and your camera's sitting on the floor, and that's painful in its own right. This power box from SVBONY is attempting to solve a few of those issues. So let's move to a top-down view and jump into it. So this is the SV241 Pro. Don't confuse this with the SV241 non-Pro. They look similar, but they're pretty different. The Pro is better in almost every way, and it's at a price point that really isn't that bad. For about twice as much, there are offerings from companies like Wander or Astro that do these sorts of things. And honestly, those seem to be like really great options. But for me, this seems like the way to go. So let's dig into this box and see if it's worth your money. Starting with the physical in the box, there's the power box itself. There's one of these bracket adapters. There's some screws. And then underneath here, there's a bunch of cables that get you, to a 12-volt accessory socket, little cables, and really nice USB data cable, and a couple other of these smaller accessory cables. But really the magic is what's going on here in this box. Okay, let's start with the input side, which is here. It's got a USB 3.0 PC port, which I have tested and is USB 3.05 gigabit per second. It does report that. It triggers the proper things to get those speeds. And then next to it is my least favorite thing about this, which is a DC port. Now this is DC 5.5 by 2.5. Now that sounds like what everything else uses, but it isn't. Most other equipment is ports like these, which are DC 5.5 by 2.1. 2.5, 2.1. Now, that 2.1 versus 2.5 is the size of that center pin there. This one is slightly thicker than what I have for most of my extensions, or what we use for most of our equipment. Now, to their credit, SVBONY does include that size connector over to the 12-volt accessory socket, and that's great, but I don't use a 12-volt accessory socket. I use an AC to DC power supply, and I didn't have any 2.5 millimeter center hole connectors, so I had to dig through all of my cables that I hadn't used in a while, and I found an extension that was also an adapter. I think I was using it, I think it's the same one you use on the old Meade LX200 systems. I would have appreciated if they included one of those adapters in the box, but my guess is that they did this because of the massive power requirements of having all of these outputs. And I could see in theory how a chunkier center pin is able to handle more of the amperage. So let's talk about all those outputs. On this side, there are 5 switchable 12-volt ports marked 1 through 5. These are all the standard 5.5 by 2.1 interface. So your Astro cam and anything else will plug right in here just fine. Switching can be done through their little interface, or like I've been doing in Nina. So this 6 port over here on the end, it's another 5.5 by 2.1. It's always on. This would be useful like if you have your mini computer or something that's using the same power, and it just needs to always be on when this thing has power. According to the specs, each port is able to supply up to 6 amps. Now that is a lot of power, and your bottleneck here is definitely going to be your power supply to the unit. SVBONY recommends, you can see there, a 12-volt 10 amp power supply, and I would have to agree. I did measure less than 0.1 volt drop between the input voltage and any of these output voltage, which is basically within margin of error of my cheapo multimeter. I did this by connecting my voltmeter to the output side, recording that it was 12.2 volts, and then measuring the voltage straight out of my power adapter. It showed us 12.21. So essentially, not really any losses. On the other side over here, we've got all the USB ports. So we've got 2 USB 3.0 ports as marked by the blue parts inside. I have tested these with a portable SSD and reached speeds of about 450 megabytes per second for read, and about 400 about 400 megabytes per second of writing to the drive. This was using a tool called Crystal Diskmark, running the SEQ1M Q depth of 8 T1 test. That doesn't mean a lot, but just for comparison, when I plugged that drive straight into a PC with a USB 3.0 port, it yielded only about 50 megabytes per second more on reads and writes. So the speeds are pretty good on this. And for what we're doing on imaging, it lives up to the spec close enough. There are also these 3 USB 2.0 ports. You can tell they're the ones with the white on them, and they operate at USB 2.0 speeds and are great for things like focus motors, etc., where high speed isn't needed. There's also this Type-C interface on the side, though unfortunately it is only operating at USB 2.1 speeds based on the sort of debugging that I was able to do, and I got about 40 megabytes per second read and write on this port. It is, able to output 2.5 amps just like all these other ones, so that is kind of nice. These USB ports are also switchable in the software, but not individually. They're broken up into 2 groups, which is kind of weird, but I guess nice in case you want to try and, unplug and plug something back in. So now on to the more interesting side. This collection of ports here. There is 2 of these 2.5 millimeter ports. These appear to be 4-pin ports. And amazingly, SVBONY actually includes 2 separate sensors, one for each. So this 2.5 temp port is meant to be a temperature sensor, which they include, and this one is meant to monitor the temperature of your telescope, hopefully the glass, but ideally this would go between your dew heater band and your scope to get an idea of what the temperature is there. The box is essentially trying to understand what the probable temperature is of the glass so that it can, try and do some magic, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. This next port here is labeled T+H. This is for the included temperature and humidity sensor, and again, this is included. This is meant to sample the air around your telescope, and with these 2 sensors providing data, the box attempts to do something really cool with one of these next ports. So next we've got PWM out 1 and 2. Don't try plugging your Super Nintendo in here, or you'll definitely blow something up. These are meant for your dew heater straps. And then at the end, there's a DC 5.5 by 2.1, which is labeled regulated. Now, initially for me, and I'm sure for some of you that may have already gotten these or were getting them a little bit early, and I bought this myself, this SVBONY didn't send me this thing for free. These ports here behaved really oddly. So I emailed back and forth with SVBONY, and in my opinion, this is not from SVBONY, but in my opinion, someone done goofed. And there was some weirdness with the firmware. So in the first response from them, they said, hey, go make sure and update your firmware. So sure enough, on the 20th of October, I went to their website and there was a new firmware for this. So I had gotten my box on the 16th and I hadn't seen that firmware when I went to grab all the drivers. And I'm going to do a small tangent here for those people that actually need to do this update because it can be kind of weird. So skip forward if you don't need to do the update. All right, you got to do the update. Go to SVBONY's website. On the top, click over to support, then click software. You'll see the defaults like the SDK one. Go past that and click on the one that says Windows. Scroll down to Firmware Package and Flashing Tool for SV241 Pro and download that. If this is your first time setting up the unit, scroll up a little bit, grab the ASCOM driver software for SV241 Pro Astro Power Box Controller and the SVBONY Hub Controller app. To do the firmware update on one of these, you plug the unit into power and into your PC, extract the zip file, that firmware package and flashing tool v1. Inside there is a folder called firmware package and flashing tool v1.1. Inside there is a folder called A-Loader. Once you get there, you can double click on that main.exe app. This is all very strange and felt weird doing it, but it did work. This will open a completely Chinese app. I just started clicking around. In the dropdown, you have to select the COM port that is representing your Astro Power Box. If you don't know which COM port this is, open Device Manager. To do that, go to the Start menu and search Device Manager, open that. expand the ports area. Here you'll see a list of any devices that are reporting a COM port to the system. The SVBONY device is tagged as USB serial CH340. If you have more than one USB serial CH340s in this list, go to your computer and unplug everything that isn't this and like your keyboard and mouse or whatever. And then go back and find it. And then it'll say USB serial CH340 COM14. That's what it was on mine. Okay, so back in the weird Chinese app with a COM port selected, click on the only clickable button in this weird app. A lot of text will scroll across that little thing on the bottom and will eventually say something like a device reset, and the scrolling will stop. On my computer, this took 1 to 2 minutes. And then after it's done that, let it sit and make sure it's done. Close that weird app, and then I unplugged and replugged the power box from USB and power, and you should be good to go. Back to the interesting things that this device claims to be able to do. And if none of this stuff works for you, rewind the video, go do the firmware update or the ASCOM driver update or one of those. I may give SVBONY crap from time to time, but they do respond to emails quickly enough, typically by the next business day. Now, within Nina, under equipment / then switches, you can now select the SVBONY switch. You do have to click the configure icon next to the next to where you pick it on the dropdown and put in that COM port. You just have to do this the first time, then click connect. And now you have access to all the things that this box can do. In the top part here are the gauges telling you some information. There's power, which best I can tell is total power flowing through the unit. There's voltage, which is the input voltage. There's ambient temperature, which is reading from the T and H sensor. There's ambient humidity, which is also reading from that T and H sensor. And then lens temperature, which is in theory reading from the temp probe that's attached to the temp port. And dew point. This is a calculated figure based on those two ambient values. Under here, there are switches for each of the DC port, which, by the way, in that configuration thing where you put in the COM port, you can rename these ports to whatever you want. So you can do that and say, this one was for my camera and yada, yada, yada. And there's also switches for the USB ports to turn those on and off, like I mentioned, and it tells you which ports it'll turn on and off. Last are the variable ports. There's one labeled 0 to 15.3 volts, which is controlling that DC 5.5 jack, which is tagged as regulated. So this controls the voltage coming out of that. Then there's PWM1, which I'm told controls the ramp up of the magic with the PWM port, and PWM2, which controls the pulse width modulation of PWM port 2, the physical port on the box. So this PWM port wasn't working correctly before the firmware update. So if yours is behaving oddly, for me, what it was doing was I would have my DO controller plugged into PWM port 1, and I would move this slider for port 1 and nothing would happen. But if I would move the slider for port 2 in the software, then the DO heater would get hot. Once I did the firmware update, all of this went away and it started working somewhat more normally. Here's actually what I got from SVBONY about this PWM1 port. And as far as I can tell, this info isn't really published anywhere. So extra, read all about it. We got a hot scoop on Deep Sky Labs. This is from SVBONY. PWM1 defaults to 79% power output upon power up. I actually think they meant 70%. When the ambient temperature is above 15 C and the heater sensor temperature rises 7.5 C above the dew point, heating automatically stops. When the ambient temperature is between 1 C and 15 C, heating stops when the heater temperature rises 10 C above the dew point. When the ambient temperature is below 0 C, the heater remains on and stops only when the heater temperature rises above 5 C. Users can flexibly adjust the default heating power by configuring the heater PWM1 level when the heater temperature falls below the protection level. Note, manual control is not available when the heater is in protection mode. The default PWM1 output is Smart Defogger output port. PWM2 only supports manual settings. So that's directly from them. let me tell you how I'm sort of looking at this. So at any given point, the box will turn on the output of PWM1 in an attempt to raise the lens temperature to either 7.5 degrees C above the dew point if it's over 15 C outside, or 10 degrees C above the dew point if it's under 15 C outside but above freezing. If it's below freezing, it'll only turn the PWM off once the value is over 5 C absolutely. The slider on the PWM1 controls, in theory, the default heating power of that on time. That seems to be what I'm trying to understand, but I haven't actually seen that work. From what I can tell, it's just using the 70% default power. I can tell that the ring is only consuming about 21 watts during the warming phase because of the power readings that the box gives us itself. If that ring was at full power, it will consume 30 watts. 21 watts is about 70% of 30 watts. So I'm gonna say that for right now, the slider doesn't seem to do much of anything, but I will keep playing with it and let anybody know if it does anything different. Here's the screen recording, though, of all of this happening in action. So to trigger the warming, because it was warm outside, I rubbed an ice cube, or what we're calling in the labs a frigid science polyhedron, on the temperature probe to trick it into thinking that the glass was cold. And we can see the behavior here. At idle, the box shows 5 to 7 watts being used. During the warm-up, we see it go up to about 26 to 28. And we can see that once it gets to around 7.5 C above the dew temperature, it throttles that down. So this is proof it works. And we can see that I did this test a couple of times just to make sure. I tried moving the slider. You can see that if I move the slider, it doesn't really change the behavior, but it does still function. So with this little box right here, you can have an effortless night with no dew creeping up on your scope because you forgot to set the temp correctly with your manual controller, like I have tons of time. I don't want to just blast the power on those dew rings all night. As on like the C8, there's been reports that when it's too hot, it can lead to weird aberrations on sort of medium to bright stars. So smart control really is the best here. I'll let this box do its thing, and you can tell it's working because in that screen, occasionally the value that's being reported on the right-hand side will just blip up to full power or whatever, and you'll see the wattage being consumed. And here's some pictures of what my setup looks like when I took this and actually put it onto my machine. I've been using this for like a week now because I wanted to make sure that it did what it was supposed to do before I filmed this video. I used the very convenient mounting points on the bottom of the box to attach it to a, where it is, there it is, Losmandy clamp. So this clamps onto a Losmandy rail. Let me get that screw out of there. I have a separate rail on the top of my main scope, so I just put it there. I connected the Celestron dew ring to PWM1. I want to play with trying to get the temperature signal off of the dew ring in the future, as it should be able to work. If anyone has any ideas, please comment down below. But I know that the Celestron dew ring is 2 poles, and the SVBONY box input is 4 poles. So I don't know, maybe I'll have to slice up the cable and see what I can do. In the meantime, I did what I thought was pretty clever, and I ran the temp sensor up to the corrector plate and clipped it to the place that would normally hold the power wire if the power wire was being used. So this gives it a somewhat imprecise but close enough temperature reading that it has worked well the last couple nights that I've been using it. And then I plugged that into the temperature sensor. The TNH sensor, I plug that in and run that to some open air down the main cable bundle because I don't want it to be too warm or too cold if it's too close to like electronics. I have my focus motor powered off the power side, and it's plugged in, the data is plugged into the USB 2 port. I have my guide cam connected to a USB 2 port as well, as it's the 120 mini and it's only capable of USB 2.0. The main imaging camera is connected to a USB 3 port, one of the blue ones, and the power to it is coming from the power side. And this is all fed, the box is fed with a high quality USB 3.0B cable and a high quality 5.5 by 2.5 extension running down to a 12 volt, 10 amp power supply. So I've had this running for about a week, basically every night. We got really lucky and we haven't had clouds in like 6 or 7 days. So it's been running essentially every single night. And it seems to control the dew well. I haven't seen dew show up in any of my images, and it's not just sitting there roasting the corrector plate. I've checked in on it and it's, you know, not on all the time. I'd have to say that this box here definitely does what it says it will. And besides that software weirdness when you first set it up, or at least when I first set it up, it's been working great. I'll have links to all of this stuff down below if you're interested. They're Amazon affiliate links. Again, SVBONY didn't send me this. I paid for this out of my own pocket. They're always running sales on like Amazon and stuff, so you can usually get these at a pretty good price. Clear skies and dew-free optics. From Deep Sky Labs, I'm Francisco.